Hi, everybody. How are you? Good afternoon, Thursday afternoon. I'm looking at my clock. I'm not sure why exactly, but it's all good. I am thrilled. I'm coming from a different location today, so you see lots of colors. But I am thrilled to bring to you one of the experts in the field of a minute or so. I just asked her, she just joined, so we should be coming on in 1 second, and here she is.
Hello.
I'm so thrilled to have you on here. You and I, while doing our technical piece a few minutes ago, but we've had a few very interesting conversations, and I'm just excited to introduce you to this audience. I'm going to let you actually introduce yourself, because I feel like we each do the best job at advocating for ourselves and the kinds of things that we do best. So you have the floor. Tell everyone who you are and what your role is at JFF and a little bit about the organizations. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on. So I'm Elana Frank. I am an Atlanta resident, and I am currently the CEO and founder of the Jewish Fertility Foundation. So we're a relatively new organization. We've been around since 2015, and we do three main functions. We provide financial assistance by the way of infertility grants for IVF and Iui treatments. And we also provide emotional support through traditional support groups, as well as a peer-to-peer mentorship program. And the third thing we do are educational trainings on a community level for doctors, for rabbis, for mikveh attendants, as well as for the community who are dealing with infertility. And we focus on infertility trainings specifically for the Jewish community.
And so can you, first of all, I mean, you're tackling 1,000 different areas. So first of all, I mean, it's incredible. Tell me, tell me and tell everyone else a little bit more about like specifically the funding piece, because I know
Sure.
there are lots of organizations that do support and also do the awareness and sensitivity. And so I don't think you necessarily have to explain that to this audience. I think people really know what that looks like. But can you explain a little more about that process,
Sure.
what your process looks like in terms of the financial piece?
Sure. So I will say, so my journey started about 11 years ago, and even the word journey is being overused these days in the infertility space. But 11 years ago, I got married, and I'm a good Jewish gal, and I thought when you get married, you have babies. So it didn't go exactly like that for me and my husband. We had recently made Aliyah, and I was
Aliyah means, I'm just going to explain for my audience, because we have lots of different people here. So Aliyah means literally going up. It's a Hebrew word that means going up, and it's referred to when people move from another country to Israel. Okay, so Go ahead.
So my husband and I, who met, I was 28 years old. We got married. He was 35. He's 5 years older than me, 28 plus 5. And we got married, and we were just going to go make lots of babies. We always envisioned 4 babies. We had this dream of having like 2 of our own, and then we were going to adopt 2. And so when we started trying, it just was not working. So we were very luckily living in Israel, which is a country that provides socialized medicine, which means that if I work and pay my taxes, I receive benefits from the state for medical coverage. So we basically spent a lot of time with some sketchy doctors in Israel, because 11 years ago, I literally was the only one in the world going through this, and social media wasn't talking about it in the way that it was. So I was doing Iui treatments in the basement of a doctor's house in Israel, but I was paying at the time.
Oh my
gosh. unpack that. So my aunt was in the medical field in Israel. I did share with her we were having some trouble. My parents didn't even know, my friends didn't know, but she's like,
because we as a community weren't talking about this at all.
Right.
Forget about social media. We weren't even having these conversations with our parents. Right.
Exactly. So, and also it didn't help that I was living in northern Israel where English was rare, and, I didn't even know that I could talk about it or how to talk about it. I just knew things were really hard with my husband and I, and that I had already seen one doctor who was giving me Clomid and I wasn't getting pregnant. So I finally reached out to my aunt and said, I should probably see a doctor. At the time, she said, see this doctor. He's the head of a big hospital in Israel. And in Israel, I'm American, right? So, and I was still learning how to navigate the system, but I was okay writing a check. So I would go to his house late at night because it was his private clinic in his house, which is not too uncommon.
Right.
And we were driving an hour away for months and months and months doing Iui treatments. So for those of you who don't know exactly what that means, some might say it's a turkey baster method where they take my husband's sperm and put it inside of me. So what was interesting about this is that he never checked me once. He never took blood tests. He never checked to see me. And my husband was doing his business in his downstairs basement bathroom. He would check his sperm literally in front of us in a microscope. I mean, the whole thing was super weird, but what did we know anyway?
I'm shuddering as a physician. I'm sort of shuddering as I'm hearing all of this. Okay.
So, and then he was telling us my husband's sperm is bad. Look here in the microscope, your husband's sperm is bad, which my husband's sperm is fine, which was very interesting. But we listened, we did everything he told us to do because he was a doctor of an important hospital, fertility clinic. And we were writing him checks because we're American. We're used to writing checks. And I really wanted a baby. So my husband was doing anything to make me happy. We didn't know what was going on. And we did this for months. I don't know how many times we did it because it all is a blur, but we did it for months. And when I say we're writing checks, we were writing probably $50 checks, but you don't need to do right. And in America, obviously it's much more expensive. Right. Anyway, fast forward, we knew it was weird and sketchy because we felt it was weird and sketchy. And then I was like, let's just get a second opinion. We got a second opinion. This is probably already a year into our trying, longer than a year. And the second opinion revealed I actually have a diagnosis. My tubes are blocked. So let's say, doctor, that I got pregnant, it would probably have been, I probably wouldn't have gotten pregnant, but if I did, it would have been perhaps an ectopic pregnancy or tubal pregnancy and could have really hurt me. Fast forward, I have my diagnosis. Thank God I was in Israel. The doctor typed on his computer, I was eligible for IVF. And that meant that it didn't cost me any money. So I was able, luckily, to do it a few months later, and I retrieved a lot of eggs. At the time, I didn't know anything about testing embryos, but I was really lucky and I was able to have 2 children from those eggs. I had about maybe 14 embryos.
It's amazing. Almost an unheard of number, but amazing.
It was great. 14, I put them all in, not at once, probably through 5 IVF cycles, but it worked the first 2 times. They were both pregnancies were twins, and we lost one each time. And the truth is that it wasn't as devastating at the time. Again, I know a lot more today than I knew then. And I was just so thankful that one of them made it each time. Looking back now, I think I'm thinking about that a lot more because I'm done growing my family, and I always just wonder if. But I do have an 8-year-old son and a 6-year-old son from that first batch. And I'm kind of going off track for your question, but I'll finish this part and explain how it relates.
Right.
And so when we moved back to America now 6 years ago, it was the first time that I was starting to talk about my journey. In Israel, I did not talk about it. I was working at an immigrant youth village. It was a religious nonprofit. And I just remember the comments that people were making and literally poking my stomach because I was getting heavier and looking like I was pregnant from all the hormones that I was on. I mean, people in Israel are ruthless anyway about asking, you've been married for how long? Why are you,
No filters whatsoever in Israel. Everybody's blunt and asks you everybody's business, asks you your business, the neighbor on the street and also the person in the at the supermarket is asking you, your private business. Yeah.
It's hard. And then, even my aunt and uncle are like, what? You don't know how to have sex? You want us to teach you? Or like, go take a vacation. It was just, it was all the typical things that I know, like, now I know I wasn't alone in this, and other people, deal with just stupid comments all the time. But at the time, like, I didn't even know how to react. And it was very hard. I mean, there were many moments where my husband and I just, like, he didn't know how to help me. I didn't know how to help me. Right. I remember my mom was coming up. My mom visited, and like, we were in the midst of shots, right? And like, we didn't even know how to tell her. And my mother's the type of person that all she wants to do is help. But I didn't even know how to tell her how to help me at the time when she finally figured out what was going on.
Look, for so many people, I mean, your experience is so as unique as it is, because everyone's experience is unique, but there are so many pieces and so many threads that run through so many people's stories, because even though we are at a point now where we are talking more about people's difficulties, there are still so many difficulties in terms of these interpersonal relationships and how to tell people, how to not to tell people, what to say, to anyone. And so these are universal issues, and they don't go away.
Absolutely. And then when we moved back to America, I finally started talking about it. And at the same time, I created this organization. And I'll get to that in a second, but my journey, I felt like, was just beginning. So I did have 2 kids under the age of 2 when we moved back to America. I started talking about things, and I also knew my family wasn't done. So I also had extra embryos in Israel, and we had continued paying our national insurance so that I could fly back and forth to Israel to try to get pregnant again. And this is about the time that my husband's like, when we're done with these embryos, we're done. Like, you can have as many kids as you want. I think we had probably, I don't know, right, 2, 4. So we had like 10 embryos left. So he's like, have as many kids as you want from these 10, but after this, we're done. Like, I'm already getting older. Like, I'm out.
Right.
So, and this was, right. So this was like 6 years ago. So I was flying back and forth, leaving my babies with my husband and my parents. Luckily, at this point, they were very supportive, and I was not getting pregnant, and I used up all the embryos. And at this time, I was paying, like, I think it was $1,800 for a frozen embryo transfer, because I was done paying my national insurance, and it was basically it's called cross-border reproductive care. So pretty much anybody can go to Israel and utilize the amazing medical services of Israel for a reduced rate. That's a whole nother conversation.
Okay, that is another conversation. But yes, keep going.
So anyway, I wasn't getting pregnant, and I knew my family wasn't done. So around this time, I was like, Jason, my husband, I said, I'm not done. And he's like, okay, let's look into adoption. Because we said we always wanted 4 kids. We were going to have 2 biological kids and then 2 of our own.
Right.
But the clock was ticking. So, and he also had said, like, you could have as many kids as you want until I turn 40. So he's already like over 40. And I kept on like bribing him, one more year. So we went actually, and we went to the foster care system. We got trained. We keep Shabbat. So we're in Atlanta, Georgia. The foster care system here is not very friendly to Shomer Shabbat or Sabbath observers. In terms of training, you have to do a lot of training in order to be part of the system. So we weren't looking to foster kids. We were looking to adopt kids out of the system once their ties with their biological parents were severed, So we were going to get a baby that way. That's what we decided. And then throughout the process, my husband decided that he's much more altruistic than I am, and he wanted to adopt a sibling unit that is older. And I just freaked out one day after about a year of doing trainings and finally getting certified. I said, I just want a baby. I want a baby who I can, you know, raise as my own from birth. And I just said, we're not on the same page, which caused a lot of tension in our marriage and our life. And keep in mind, I'm like, I have these two little kids who I love, but I have this like hole in my heart.
Right.
Feeling also guilty that I already have these two kids that I worked really hard for. And now I'm running this organization and people are coming in and they have much worse stories than I did. I actually have the two kids at the end and I'm still feeling like I'm not done. And I feel like an internal struggle that like, I want more kids, but I just don't know how to get this kid. And I
think when people talk about this secondary infertility, I mean, which is effectively what you were going through. I mean, this secondary infertility, which a lot of people who are going through primary infertility don't understand, but this is a very real and painful reality for so many who feel this burning hole, even though they have children at home. So yes. I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm hearing new comments from family members, from just people in general. And I'm in this space. So people are like, oh, you should be grateful for the two kids you have. I'm like, obviously I'm grateful. Well, you shouldn't be so focused on this. You should focus on them. You know, people were like, well, what color kid are you going to get? You know, my dad just is Israeli. Like he's very blunt also. He's like, well, you know, how, if you get a kid who is, you know, different color than you, how are they going to get married in the Jewish community? And keep in mind, I'm coming from Israel at this time, working with the Ethiopian population. And I'm just like, wait, what are these questions? We just want a kid who needs us and who we want to love. Anyway, the wait for a baby, when my husband finally, again, agreed to meet my needs, was 3 years. Okay. So, and we just couldn't afford to adopt a kid. I love when people are like, just adopt. Oh, just $35,000 to $70,000 for an international adoption. So we're like, oh my gosh. So then I literally rent space from an adoption, like a third party reproductive attorney who works in adoption. Women are coming in who are pregnant. I'm like, oh, I'm Elana. I run Jewish Fertility Foundation. I can find a baby. I sent it to all our gynecologists that I was looking for a baby, all the NICUs, and we were pretty flexible in what type of baby we wanted, and nothing was happening. People intended, like birth mothers were coming and interested in our profile, and then they would see us had already 2 biological kids, and they're like, you're gonna not love our kid as much as your kid. I'm like, oh my God. And then in one instance, a birth mother wanted to make sure we had acreage for farm animals, which we don't, but we just kept on getting rejected. And around this time, one of my passion projects on the side is to help people match embryos from the freezer. And somebody called me.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Match embryos from the freezer? Tell me more about that for a second.
Sure. So like many people who have gone through fertility treatments through IVF have remaining embryos once they're done growing their family. And there are a few options for what to do with them. You can donate them to science. You can discard them. You can throw them out. Or you can donate them. So that means that you can literally donate essentially your biological child to another individual or family who wants to grow their child. So it's similar to egg donation and sperm donation, but this is already jointly, like you can buy eggs and you can buy sperm. You can't purchase an embryo. Kind of like a kidney. You can't purchase a kidney. But you can I can receive a donated embryo and somebody can donate their embryos. And it's similar to an adoption, like you need a lawyer and it's there's lots of medical testing involved. But essentially somebody reached out and said that I had helped them through their journey several years prior, and they wanted to donate embryos. And for months, I was trying to find the perfect match for this woman. And on one Shabbat, I was reading People magazine, and I I saw somebody else had done this, even though this is my space, and something in me clicked. And I asked my husband, I'm like, would you be open to this? And after like another adoption attempt, and he's like, his whole attitude around everything is, how much is it going to cost us? And embryo donation is significantly less expensive than like a fresh fertility IVF retrieval.
Okay.
Because you're really only paying for the frozen embryo transfer, legal costs, and FDA testing, as well as some psychological testing. So it's about $10,000, like at the end of the day.
As opposed to 20 plus usually ish in the States, ish.
Right. Yeah. And anyway, so I received donated embryos, and I now have the cutest little 10-month, actually almost 11-month-old from that process.
Wow.
It's just
Wow.
incredible that this is an option.
Wow.
So anyway, so you asked me the question like 20 minutes ago.
Yes. No, I mean, the question was, tell me more about the financial piece, but I wanted to hear, obviously your story, your passion for this field is because of who you are and the kinds of experiences that you've had. So you can't share one without the other. So that obviously makes sense. But so
Sure.
Now that people know more about you and everything that you've experienced, not everything, but pieces of what you've experienced, how did that inspire you to then, create JFF and the kinds
Sure.
of things that it does?
Great. So yes, it's personal, but also I have 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector and fundraising, community organizing, volunteer recruitment. And so when I moved back to the States and I finally started talking about it and understanding that people were not able to have their families or grow their families because of financial constraints, that's when I was like, oh, hey, we need to help pay for this. And that's when I was utilizing all of my community building understanding and fundraising understanding, essentially to raise money to give out money. And 5 years ago, when I started talking about this in Atlanta, I understood that services like this aren't community-based, that do exist, and they're not meeting the needs of our Jewish community as it looks like today. So I started talking to anybody who had listened to me. That turned into an advisory committee, which turned into a board of directors, which after a year and a half of working together, we understood, well, hey, wait a second, we can raise money and give it out, but we didn't feel comfortable giving out money without educating the community around infertility and the prevalence in the Jewish community. And we didn't feel comfortable handing out money because it wasn't going to solve all the problems. It will solve a lot, but not all of them, without joining it together with emotional support. So we created Jewish Fertility Foundation, and the pilot community was Atlanta at the time. So the financial support we offer is also in three ways. One, we do offer Iui Grants, which is basically $1,000, and it's less based on financial need and medical potential for success. It's more just a hug from the Jewish community. I'm sorry you're going through this. Here's $1,000 to get you started. Out of the grants that we've given out, like 90% of them, unfortunately, have to also apply for a IVF grant, just because of the rates of success around Iui treatments. So our IVF grants, we give out $1,000 to $10,000. And in Atlanta, the average cost of one IVF cycle is about $20,000. So we give out $1,000 to $10,000. Plus, we've negotiated rates with all of our fertility clinics locally for a 20% discount rate. Plus, we partner with the local interest-free loan association, which gives out an additional $7,500 of interest-free loans. So you can leave our offices with a chunk of money. And then we opened up our second office last year in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's the same program, it's the same concept. The money piece is a little less just because the cost of treatment is a little less. So in Cincinnati, Ohio, we offer $1,000 to $7,500 in grants. The Hebrew free loan is $5,000, but the 20% discount at the clinics is the same.
And how so what is the process like? Do you you said in terms of medical, you have to call me in the middle of this live. It's so rude. Do you find that like you give out these grants based on financial need, obviously, but then you said medical need in terms of, or medical, or I don't remember the word you used. I don't remember if it was a possibility for success, I think was the terminology that you used.
Sure.
How does JFF define that?
So it took several years to really identify our process and create metrics so that we're not just giving out money because it feels good. We also have to take our donor dollars very seriously. And we've given out $365,000 in the past 3 years.
Unbelievable.
So it's a lot of money, and we're projected to give out $120,000 this year. So we take it very seriously. So we have a medical committee made up of all the fertility clinics that we work with, 2 doctors from each, and they devised an application that helps them understand 2 things. One is the likelihood of achieving pregnancy, and the second is the likelihood of having residual embryos or extra embryos in the freezer. Because again, we know a frozen embryo transfer costs a lot less money.
Right.
And we also know that, unfortunately, just because you're doing IVF doesn't mean you're going to have 100% success. It's closer to 50-60. I mean, depending on the case. So
and success, you're defining success as someone getting pregnant, or success as having a healthy baby in 9 months?
I mean, ideally a healthy baby, because I mean, we know statistically, unfortunately, people are going to have losses and miscarriages and stillbirths. And we've had all of that within the grantees that we've served, which is like, just obviously it's so hard for them, but it's also like, what a hit for us, man. Like we're along with you in the journey. It's not that we just give you money and say, you know, be on your way. We're with you. So what were we saying?
How do you define success?
Oh, okay. So that's the medical component. And then in terms of financial, we're able to look at a whole slew of things. And we do ask a lot of questions. It is pretty invasive in your financial portfolio.
As it should be, frankly. If you're giving out money, then it should be invasive in that sense, because you want to make sure that you're giving to families who are truly needy as opposed to not needy. Right. So yes.
So we do look at a lot of things. Like there is a sweet spot. People ask me, but I'm making X amount of dollars. Should I still apply? Right. Okay, so there are other factors that we look at. How much have you spent already on treatments? It's okay to own a home. Like we expect that if you're in your 20s to, you know, early 40s. And we also want to make sure that you have enough money in order to fulfill your cycle. We're not looking to see if you're going to be sending your kids necessarily to private school, but we're trying to understand if you can afford the rest of your cycle, because you are going to have to pay for a component of the treatment. So we unfortunately applied, and they had $25,000 already in debt and literally $25 in their bank account. And they just weren't, you know, if we weren't going to give them the whole amount of money, what were they going to do? And where was that donor money going to go? So it's kind of all of those factors together.
Yeah. I don't envy you, and I don't envy your committee who tries to do the best job in terms of making these decisions. Not at all. Let me ask you something, just as a slight pivot, something that you and I have spoken about a little bit. Tell me, you know, you were talking, you've spoken to me about how there are different subsets of the community that come and are coming to you for donations and asking for these grants. But one specific subset of the community that's coming to you is single moms by choice. And I just wanted to hear about that and hear, you know, what your relationship is and how that works, and what you can tell us about that community.
Sure. So it is really interesting. We've seen a few trends the past 5 years of doing this work. And one of the pieces of our organization that we really support is medical infertility. And the way we understand what that means is that you need an infertility specialist, a reproductive endocrinologist, in order to be able to grow your family. So, and you need to have a diagnosis of infertility. So if you're coming to us and just need sperm or eggs, we're not really going to pay for that. But if you alone or your partner need actual assistance, something biologically isn't working, that's kind of where we step in financially. So emotionally, anybody can, be a part of our programs, regardless even of your religious background. But so we were seeing a trend that a lot of Jewish intended single moms were calling us. And that was just not something that was even on my radar screen. So last year, I believe, we opened up the grant to single moms by choice. Again, they're not coming to us if they're just going to be, they're not starting the conversation with us if they just need sperm and are intending to do an IUI treatment. So that's not exactly.
And also, I'm guessing, and they're not coming to you to ask for money for egg freezing. They're coming to you. They're coming to you because they want to start a family themselves.
Exactly. So generally, we see after the age of like 37 is when we're starting to talk to these women.
Okay.
And one of the criteria of infertility might be based on age and, how many eggs you have inside of you. So other times people have other diagnosis, PCOS, or just they're dealing with something else that, the initial IUI.
Right. All sorts of
right.
Right.
And then by the point that they're coming and talking with us, they have a diagnosis and they have a fertility treatment plan beyond just IUI. So they're literally coming to us, getting grants. And what was interesting this past year is that, in addition to offering money, which we do, we also offer this support. And we currently have about 30 Jewish women, intended parents, and then also people on the other side now who have children already, who are part of this community in Atlanta specifically.
Wow.
And it's growing by leaps and bounds. We just put out like they're having a meetup or something in a few Sundays from now, and people are just, swarming. Like we really see this as something that's happening. And in our offices in Cincinnati as well, which are newer, we're curious to see the trend. Is this just an Atlanta thing, which I don't think so, or is it in the other cities that we're serving?
Right. And the assumption being that these are individuals that have a medical diagnosis and unfortunately haven't found a partner yet and don't want life to pass them by. And so therefore JFF is open to having, funding those kinds of families as well, which I think is absolutely incredible.
And it's interesting to see the response from the Jewish communal leadership around this has been really, really positive, because we partner with synagogues and rabbis from all denominations, and their response has been really welcoming and warm. And what another way to support our Jewish community, in this moment of just stress and grief and trauma. And,
Correct.
It's been really great.
Correct. Because on a communal level, we know that the single community feels marginalized. It feels that they don't have a voice, that they feel isolated from communal events. They feel they're not brought to the table in so many different ways, literally and